This must be the longest presidential campaign in the history of the United States, with the possible exception of the 4 years that Andrew Jackson spent running against John Quincy Adams. And the first notion on my mind is to ask how this is affecting the work of our panel. And Kay, first question, we'll let you get started on that.
Well, the longest campaign, that's, you know, what is happening, I think, is people are getting bored with the campaign. They have given up. I was mentioning earlier to Mike that I had gone back and looked up a pamphlet that David Broder had written about in 1991 about covering the horse race. And the pamphlet was saying people feel disenfranchised, they don't feel that the candidates are speaking to them. And so Broder and all the pundits got on board and said, no, we shouldn't be covering the horse race, we should be covering issues. Well, all these years later, we are still covering the horse race. And it's gotten to the point now with the coverage of the what Al Gore wore in 2000, what Kucinich wore to rock the boat, the black turtleneck in 2004, and to Hillary's coral jacket that we are covering the horse blanket. I think people are a little tired of superficial coverage.
Yeah, I think the other factor in the longer campaign coverage was the media, particularly newspapers, but I think television as well. Their resources are very stretched right now. Covering a long campaign cycle is difficult, and I think what that necessarily means, Scott may disagree, but it seems to me that the lion's share of the coverage, which I think is going to happen in some course in the campaign, the lion's share of the coverage always focuses on the front runners. Right now it's Clinton, Obama, and Edwards. It's Giuliani, it's Romney, it's McCain, and I guess Thompson, although Thompson's entrance into the campaign was kind of a thud. But I think that happens much, I think that's going to happen much earlier now. In a traditional campaign, everybody gets coverage and it kind of shakes out. Now you're going to see, even before we have the first primaries, I think that cut has already been made. You don't hear about Kucinich, you don't hear about Dodd or some of these other candidates. I think that's bad because as you get closer to these primaries, the guys at the bottom, that was the traditional time that they could pull a surprise, and I think that this election cycle, that just can't happen. The other problem, I think, with the longer campaign is just sheer boredom. And the risk that it runs is with the cycle being so changed this year. The reason why, first off, the reason why the campaign is longer is so many states have moved their primaries up early in the year, like Florida did. So by all realistic, estimates, this election, this primary election will be over in February. So that means we're going to be stuck with two candidates for the entire year. And what I'm just real interested to see, especially if it's someone like a Clinton or a Giuliani, what happens in May when the big scandal breaks? What happens? It doesn't give the party a whole lot of time to recover from something like that. So I think it's going to be an interesting cycle to watch, and frankly, I think it's a little scary.
On that though, yeah, a couple of thoughts on that, Mike. Actually, one, you talked about the coverage that the lower tier candidates don't get. It was interesting just to me. On the way out here, I live in Longwood, so I drove out here. And I saw one presidential candidate sign as I was getting on the 417, and it was for, yeah. So I guess people know who he is. The long campaign, the one I remember was the presidential one because we talked about what happened here in Central Florida. I am a news anchor that doesn't have a regular news anchor shift because it was in 2004. I came off a regular shift to cover politics specifically and to cover the campaign. And for the last, I don't know how long, it seemed like every week, right here in Central Florida, I was at an event with either Bush, Cheney, Kerry, or Edwards. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. It was like we checked, see, okay, who's getting, of course, a lot of times they don't announce it over there. I heard all the stump speeches, I saw all the, you know, and got to a point where I wasn't sure I could differentiate them. So that to me was long because it wasn't really long, but it was for us, because every time we turned around here in Central Florida, one of the major candidates was here. So my question to the long campaign, in one sense, is we're into it. Those of us sitting up here, and a lot of you, because you're here, I assume, are into it. But how many people really are paying attention yet? How many people really are? They know kind of who they are and what they are, but are they going to wait until something happens? And you think about sorting out the candidates. I think the front-loaded primary, especially the Florida primary, us, we want to be a part of the attention, but Florida is not a retail politics state. The way you win in Florida, of course, is going to be, yeah, you'll have appearances, but the appearances aren't to appear. They're so people like us can be there and do reports on them, and then you'll have all the advertising. And this thing with the Democrats, I've had a lot of people tell me, it has worked in Florida to Hillary Clinton's benefit, because if none of the other candidates, if they're not going to come here and campaign, and they're not going to advertise, then who do people know? They know Hillary Clinton. She is, quote, the front runner. So, I mean, she's got to be smiling. Her campaign people are going to be smiling about the Florida situation. Now, why John Edwards or why Barack Obama would sign that pledge, I don't know. The one thing I like about Iowa and New Hampshire, yes, they are not representative of the country. They are different. They're a different breed of people. The system, the Iowa system in particular. What's that all about? What is that all about? Where did they come? Who came up with that?
Tupperware.
Hey, you're right, because you don't have enough, then you can move to another group. It's just a great. But I think my sense is that these people at least take it seriously, and they want to see the candidates. They want the candidates to show up. They want the candidates to speak to them, to answer their questions. And I kind of like that the first kid, you don't like it, all right, okay. No, I like it because I think it puts the candidates in a different way. Now, do we give it too much attention? Probably. That's what we do in the media. Whatever the thing of the week is and the thing of the day, we're going to be all over that, and that's the most important thing until tomorrow. But I kind of like it that it's at that retail level and that some of that goes on, because otherwise it would get lost in huge primaries in a national election. I had words, I forget what I was going to say.
Let me go back, kind of backtrack and expand on that a little bit. You started touching on a direction I wanted to take this in, and that is the rush for all the primaries. Everybody wants to be earlier, to be first, to have influence, and now both Democrat and Republican parties are imposing penalties on the state of Florida. The Democrats are more severe. They don't want the candidates to come here, but they certainly want our money. And we're hearing some principal fundraisers around the state saying, no, I'm not going to be holding fundraisers in my mansion for you. How serious is this? Are the parties shooting themselves in the foot here in Florida with this rush? And Michael, we'll let you start on that.
Well, I mean, I think that someone has to win Florida. So I think that, as Scott said, Hillary Clinton is clearly, this helps her immensely because the others can't campaign here. I think that by the time this all works itself out, the reason why Florida is being penalized as well as Michigan is because the two states moved their primaries up to be just behind Iowa's caucuses and New Hampshire's primaries. For some reason, people from Iowa and New Hampshire believe that they have a God-given right to hold the first electoral.
It's the law in New Hampshire.
And it is a law. In fact, it is a law in New Hampshire that no primary can happen before then, and they were fully prepared to move their primary into December. Now, I've covered caucuses in Iowa, and I've covered primaries in New Hampshire as a reporter. I can tell you that this room, if you look around this room is probably 10 times more diverse than any meeting I ever covered or any rally I ever covered in New Hampshire or Iowa. Iowa is, the Iowa caucus it's like covered in a jar of mayonnaise. I mean, it really is. There is, and that's why this country has absurd farm policies. That's why we pay, subsidies to farmers, and I mean, just outrageous subsidies to huge corporations that happen to farm, like Archer Daniel. I mean, that's the problem. Now, right now, what's interesting, you see Florida got tired of that, so they moved their primary up. So Hillary Clinton, last week I think it was, introduced a bill to establish a national cat fund. Now, what a cat fund is like if there's a huge hurricane in Florida, then ratepayers, insurance policy owners all around the country would help pay for that damage. Now, that would never have happened, ever have happened, had Florida's primary still been way down at the bottom, because generally the presidential nominees were decided by the time Florida got a crack at it. So, from a political standpoint, it works. From what's the good from the country standpoint, and I understand the intimacy of retail politics, where you get to see John and his little farmer cap eating a bowl of chili at Ed's Diner in Sioux City. But the problem with that, I think, and the reason why I think it's especially a myth now, is because of the internet and because of the ability to connect with people now. The new intimacy happens online. It doesn't happen in a singles bar anymore. So I think that the Iowa and New Hampshire have far outlived their usefulness in that. And basically what you have is a group of middle-class white people, upper middle-class white people, culling down the candidates. And I think the country is just much more diverse than that. There are more, but I'll shut up here in a second. This is what used to drive me crazy. There are more voters in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County than there are in Iowa and New Hampshire. And that's kind of the Iowa or New Hampshire, not Iowa. That's the crux of the problem right there.
Katie, you want to weigh in on that next?
I think the reason that Florida went to an early primary, the reason that Michigan went to an early primary, was because the voters, the actual legislators did this, but the voters in these states both feel that they are not getting a voice in who's the candidate. They wanted a voice, and they didn't want to lead that to the milquetoast candidacies or decisions in Iowa and in New Hampshire, even though tradition speaks heavily towards the fun of it, the horse race coverage of that thing. But I think the real answer to this thing is to go to a national primary. To hold that national primary in March, which cuts down the campaign season, it gives everybody an equal voice, an equal chance. And I think the primary system as we have it right now is broken. It doesn't work anymore. The intent was to get candidates out talking to the people, to talk about the issues one-on-one, like in Iowa, like in New Hampshire. But what we've gotten is a system in which candidates don't talk about the issues at all. And they try not to say anything, or they try to be everything to everybody, and we don't know what they stand for. So it's just broken, and just to go to a national primary to me is the right answer.
There was actually, we as a newspaper, the Sentinel opposed moving Florida's primary for precisely this reason. We thought that it front-loaded the system and was bad for the country. Probably good for Florida, certainly we think bad for the country. There was a proposal that came out a few years ago. It was a bipartisan commission. I know Jimmy Carter was on it. I think Gerald Ford was on it as well, but I can't. They suggested an idea that we have endorsed, and what you have is you have the Iowa and New Hampshire contest, and then that would be followed by a series of regional primaries. So you have a primary in the Southeast, you have a primary in the Northeast, and the Midwest, and then you would, every 4 years, you would rotate the order of those primaries. So some years, Florida and the other southeastern states would go first, California would go second, and you rotate that. That to me has a lot of advantages, particularly because a candidate could choose not to campaign in Iowa or New Hampshire, and instead focus all of their attention, say, in the Southeast. Another candidate from the Midwest might figure, I'm going to write off the Southeast, and I'm going to concentrate on the Midwest and maybe the Northeast. It develops that kind of a strategy, and then the conventions might actually mean something, because you could have 2 or 3 candidates enter these conventions with strong regional bases. I think that would be much better for the process. I don't think that it's going to happen in my lifetime, but maybe after this year, when every primary is,
Well, if the Republicans and Democrats continue to cut people off, it might make people angry enough.
I was going to offer the contrary opinion, although Mike, you're moving towards it. Let's get rid of the primaries. Let's go back to smoke-filled rooms and broker conventions.
That's better.
I'm all for it. We got better candidates.
If you remember, that's what the primaries were a reaction to. That's how that system developed. And what was interesting, Mike, is you're leading to kind of a middle ground on that. But it's a thought, it's a different way of doing it, and the primaries aren't all sacrosanct, that's not necessarily the way, there are ways of doing it. I'm going to leave it at that, but one other thought on this, on the Florida primary. I was out at the two state conventions we had last month, the Republicans and the Democrats, which were different in a lot of ways, not surprisingly. But the Democrats on Sunday had a bunch of, they had a panel discussion. Actually, it was a day that usually a lot of them had gone home, but a lot of them stuck around with us, and they had a couple of national consultants, and one of them, the question came up about the primary, even if they get no delegates. He said, I'm a candidate, I'm a campaign manager for any candidate. He says, you asked me if I want the choice between the delegates out of the primary or the headline that he run the primary, so I'll take the headline every day. So I don't know to what extent the delegate thing is, I think it's more problematic that they're not here campaigning. But I don't think the delegate issue is an issue at all.
I wonder, in the length of this and holding on to the interest, for all these years, campaigns traditionally didn't start until after Labor Day. You know, people are busy in the summertime, they're taking vacations, they're playing with the kids. How in the world do you hold the interest of more than maybe 5 or 10% of a country as a whole when we've got this much time to deal with?
I guess it depends on who the candidates and the issues are. And the question is whether, even during those campaigns as they get longer, when you sit there and you look at going down to November election day, how many people, and again, we're all into it, and we're following it, and we're at every event, and we're writing about it, reporting about it. But how many people do you run across out there who end up voting, who 2 weeks before the campaign, they're really not into it yet. They haven't decided. So we can be out there, we can do this. Is it a creation of us, or is it, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that right now.
Okay.
Well, you know, how this is held, I think, is changing. The internet is changing the way races are run, and it was kind of interesting. There's a little poll that you might have seen that you can, what is it, something magic, check magic, something like that. And you can go onto the internet and you can rate your issues, and then the candidate shows up, where your issues are. That's a backward way of going about it. There was another internet thing that just came up in which you can volunteer. You can have invite people to speak from the various campaigns. So you know, it is changing. I don't think it's going to be stump speeches anymore. And so maybe that's why it isn't going to hurt Florida so much not to have people here right now. Yeah.
Well, you've got Obama girl. That's got a lot of interest. And you've got that great, I don't know how many people saw that, the Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton takeoff on the Sopranos, ending of the Sopranos. I mean, they're doing that kind of stuff. I mean, again, the internet is instant access. You don't need to wait for, CFN 13 or the Sentinel or the Daytona Beach paper to write a story. You can get instant access. You can contact the candidates directly. I think that makes a difference. The other kind of irony is that we've had more presidential debates this cycle than ever, and people are complaining about that. Remember, they used to complain that they would never debate, and now you can't get them to shut up. But I mean, so it's almost like it's almost like you have to, I think it's our responsibility, and I like the fact that all this information's out there. I think it is what our democracy, our republic hinges on an informed populace. But we can't inform you. I can't tackle you out in the parking lot and make you read today's editorial. You have to take that upon yourself to do that. So I like having all this information out there. The way to keep them interested, it's the same way you get people to eat spinach. I mean, it's important you need to eat spinach or you'll die a horrible death. That's it.
But is that why we do the horse race instead of getting deeper? Because people pay attention to the horse race coverage, they'll read it, they'll learn to it?
I think we pay attention to the horse race.
I think we do.
Because reporters and editorial writers and pundits find it much easier to turn to copy quickly, which is our job.
We have to write a story.
That's right.
Yeah, and when you're in the bubble, when you're traveling with the campaign, you're in the bubble. And what that means is all the reporters are kept in one little place, and they go from the plane to the bus, from the bus to the area, the cordoned off media area. They cover the event, they go back to the bus, they go to the little room where they feed them fat foods and tons of stuff to keep them lazy, and then they put them back on the bus and they take them off. They never get out and talk to real people. So it is a kind of an echo chamber thing. And that's where the horse race comes in. And we are looking for the gap. I mean, at this point, Hillary Clinton's health care plan will get news, but what's really going to get news is if Joe Biden says something stupid about Barack Obama. That's what will be flashed all over the news.
Oh, can I ask you, in reaction to that, Mike, remember something? One of the things, in tying together some things here, the internet and that pool of reporters, the blog thing, and not the blogs. What intrigues me is not so much the blogs from people who just take it upon themselves to blog, but from people like your colleagues, Mark Silver, who used to work here at the Sentinel, letter, followed you. He's now covering the White House for the Chicago Tribune, and he blogs.
He does blog. His blog is called The Swamp, and I think he told me yesterday that it gets about 2 million hits a year. So, I mean, the other thing about the pressure, I think
he's giving some of the stuff is the pool reporting. So,
right.
When you have some of it's funny, some of it's
very funny, and it gives you a kind of an insight into the campaign. But I guess my point is again, you have to be a much more. People would complain about the filters that newspapers provided. Well, they're only giving us what they want us to see. Okay. Well, that I guess is true because newspapers, like them or not, do have standards. And standards like we're not going to publish something that we know is not true. That's a pretty important standard when you're trying to figure out who you're going to vote for. And I can tell you the newspapers and TV guys, they make mistakes, but I think newspapers do their best to correct them. If you're getting your information off the internet, particularly from these blogs, you have to understand that you have to provide your own filter because of vast majority of that stuff is simple nonsense. And a lot of it, by the way, are posts by candidate staffers. We've already had the Clinton revelation a couple of days ago that they were feeding questions to people at town halls, as if that's never happened before. Heck, we even had FEMA a couple of weeks ago, fed reporters. I mean, you have to understand that that's your responsibility to cut through the chat.
Do you find, I want to talk because I think, to me, there's a difference between those kinds of blogs and the blogs I'm reading from the newspapers, from the reporters, from the Sentinel has a whole series. They're putting these are a little bit different from what you're printing, but it's more information. The Sentinel's got their whole political pulse blog, which comes from a number of different reporters. And by following that, I get sometimes a little insight, but I still expect that. Am I wrong to expect of the blogs that are done by newspaper reporters to hold to pretty much the same standards?
Yeah, but I don't think people really read them. I don't think that, I think we read them. I think political junkies read them. Newspaper junkies and news junkies in general read them. But I don't think the majority of the public are reading this, and I don't think that that's the way youth are connecting with candidates either.
Let me shift a little bit. I wanted to take a look at some of the issues that I think are going to be predominant here. And of course, we have a 10,000-pound gorilla that's hovering around behind this whole thing, and that is what is going on in Iraq and what is the role that's to be played. We thought that when the people voted here a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that Congress was going to do something about it. That was the notion. And we hear a lot of people walking around today saying, well, we're still waiting. The effect and where do you see, how do you see the candidates dealing with it? Kay, would you like to start this out?
This is for, I differ with Scott and Mike on the Hillary thing. The disadvantage or the advantage with having a primary here gives it the votes to Hillary because of her vote on Iraq, because of her then subsequent vote on Iran. There's a lot of anger out there. So it is definitely, the whole Iraq question, the whole, are we going to expand this thing and go bomb Iran, or worse yet, sit back and let somebody else bomb Iran with our blessing? That's going to be a major issue. I don't know that it's going to be resolved by the presidential debate.
Yeah, I think it is. I think in many ways it's the only issue because of what happens ancillary to it. I mean, you've got high gas prices now in part because of the turmoil in the Middle East, which I think is in part because of the war in Iraq. You've got what has amazed me about this whole process, though, is that there hasn't been. I mean, we've seen an uptick in the anti-war movement, I guess, but there's not the outrage. There's no draft. So, but I think that Clinton's position on the war, as far as the Democrats goes, she's kind of cut herself into the best position that she can. I mean, I'm not saying she doesn't believe in her position, because I think it's kind of a moderating position between McCain, who is, let's conduct this war the right way, and the others who just say they want to get out. In many ways, I think her position on the war is the most responsible. But health care is another issue that I think even with the war in Iraq, I think the economy is going to be a huge issue. And again, I see health care as a component of that because it is costing everyone more and more money, and more Americans are losing their health care coverage. I think that people are worried, people are anxious. So I think that the economy and may even at the end of the day truck Iraq before it's all said and done.
You took my line. I was going to be contrary. Say that's where it's going. And based on, actually, this goes back to talking with these Democratic strategists too at the convention down here. He gave a number of reasons for that, and I think Dr. Mann actually hit some of that. When you look at, say, on the issues, there's not that much difference between the Republicans as a group and the Democrats as the group. And then when you come to the general election, I mean, it's kind of obvious to most people, so if you feel a certain way, you're going to go with the Democrat or Republican. The Democratic strategist said, if we're back to 1992, it's the economy, stupid. He felt the economy is going to be a bigger arguable issue, and healthcare certainly is part of that money. It's going to be a big issue. One of the reasons, and it's curious, this room might be an interesting way to look at that, but one of the reasons he felt Iraq was not going to be that big an issue is Iraq, we all work with it intellectually, but does it really touch? How many of us does it really touch? Who's making sacrifices? The military and their families. Now maybe if gas prices go up, I don't know if that's a direct correlation or not, but nobody has asked the rest of us. Our sacrifice, I think we were supposed to go shopping. Is that what the goal was? So Iraq's out there. And except for the military and their immediate families, does it really affect that many people? Again, this is a simplified argument. But the economy, there's so many things going. We talked about the possibility of a recession coming down. Watch the stock market just this last week. Now, again, the stock market's kind of out there, but eventually a lot of that filters down. I think there's a good chance that the economy may be the big issue, and healthcare definitely would be part of that. One quick comment on the issues, which is interesting, because why don't we cover the issues instead of a horse race? Well, one just made the point that Hillary Clinton's position is rather nuanced. It can't be summed up in a 10-second soundbite. And that's what I do. You guys do it to a certain, not quite there. But if you can't, and you might want to argue that that's one of the reasons why the partisanship is there, is that it's much easier, and from our point of view, doing stories, it's much easier to grab an outrageous soundbite here and an outrageous soundbite there. And people will watch that on television. But if you want to sit down, like we're doing right now, and have a nuanced discussion, want to tell me how long my ratings are going to last? Anyway.
Let me ask you this now. For nearly 8 years now, or 7 years, the Republicans have done a pretty good job using Homeland Security and the security of the country itself. This has happened before in our history. They've been very successful with it. I'm wondering, is it going to play again? Do you see them continuing to use this? If you were here during the last session, you heard the doctor say, Rudy may come out and say, I'm the one that can kick ass. How much and to what extent do you see them trying to run that train down the track again? And Mike, you want to start that one?
Well, I think they will. I think that the question, though, is whether the policies of not engaging Iran and Syria and might be seen as not being what's best for our security. I think that what the Democrats are going to try to, and I think many of the Republicans are saying the same thing now, is you have to engage these countries. They're important to the stability of the Middle East. I think security will be an issue, but I think the definition of what makes us secure may change, if that makes sense. I mean, in 2004, winning Iraq and was kind of the sum of security, but I think people now look at that and think that it's made us less secure. So I think the definition of security will change. And again, if there is a terrorist attack, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be in the United States, a terrorist attack in London or Paris. I mean, I think that you could see that shift overnight, as we saw with Giuliani. Even as was said, I mean, Giuliani was like as popular as not very popular. I was going to say something a little obscene. I guess I shouldn't say that. But he wasn't very popular, and then his image changed dramatically, and he did a great job. And I think if Americans are insecure, then a candidate like Giuliani might be able to rise above his many other problems.
Okay.
How people define homeland security, I think, has changed in the last 5 years. We're a little bit away from 2001. We're over being annoyed with some of the security things at the airport, although it's still annoying to take your flip-flops off and run them through. It's not, I don't think homeland security is going to be a big issue. It might be an issue in terms of the invasion of privacy that's still going on, that debate's in Congress right now. That might come up, but I don't know if people understand how much of their privacy has been invaded as a result of homeland security.
I wondered why it's fit. I mean, there were so many things going on out there, Cat. I don't know why there hasn't been, upwards yet. Yeah, so who was it said, Rudy Giuliani said was a subject of verb at 9/11?
Yeah.
Ask New Yorkers how they felt about it on September 10th. It was a little different. And I guess the question boils down to, will someone like Rudy be able to sustain that campaign? Will he make it work? I don't know. I'm kind of amazed, as I said, for a lot of reasons. I understand terrorism. I understand that we don't like it, that we're afraid of it. But you go back, and something I've thought about for a long time, about September 11th, about 3,000 Americans were killed that day. And I don't, yes, it's the unknown, and it's terrorism, and somebody was after us, but that same month, we probably killed more than that on the highways of this country, because we kill something like 40,000 of our own citizens every year in car crashes, and we have accepted that as a cost of being able to drive where we want as fast as we want. So why is the one changed our whole life and the other one we won't change our life? We won't slow down. We're going to keep doing that. But I worry a little bit more. Dr. Mann talked about when it comes to, and I still think it goes back to, I think the Republicans and the Democrats have kind of got their sides on the Iran issue, on the terrorism issue. So the Republicans are going to have to, I think he said, put the personalities. That's how they're going to have to make the difference. And he put the positive side on it. They'll have to contrast themselves. But what I'm afraid we're going to see, because we've seen it before, because it apparently works, is the negative side of that campaigning too. It's not only that I'm the best, it's did you know this about, it's the Swift voting. It's all that again. And a lot of that, I think, is to avoid serious discussion. I'd love to have a serious discussion about war on terrorism. But what happens, and maybe again, this is us, because we're the soundbite, the quick stories, and not the nuance. If it boils down to, we have to protect us, I'd rather, it's better to waterboard somebody and let them blow something up. That's what the country wants. I guess that's what the country gets.
Let me shift again, and I want to take a brief look at some of these other things. There are other items out there. We had a great brouhaha over immigration. It seemed to go on for quite a long time. There's Medicare, there's Social Security, deficit spending, all that. how is all of the rest of this going to blend in, or is it going to be lost in the shuffle?
Didn't we solve all those things? It's an interesting point, because they were the hot button issues for a certain point, and I'm still hearing that in talking to, there was a race, a state representative race up in mostly Sentinel County to fill the seat of David Miller, who resigned, so it's an open seat. It was a special election. And one of the issues in the state representative race became immigration. And I'm not sure how that happened. It's a hot button issue. What's the, because people feel they have strong feelings about it, but what's a state representative supposed to do about it? I guess somebody can take any of these issues, and maybe it's back to that, for somehow hot butting, and unfortunately what happens, and I think that's what happened in immigration, it became a fear issue in much the same way that some of the others do. I don't know how they'll play. I suspect, I do think that the economy and the security or the terrorism issue or the foreign policy issue will probably dominate, but I don't know. I don't see them being strong.
I think to a lesser extent, immigration will be used as a wedge issue. It's not going to be like the discussion like Social Security, which Democrats will tend to use that as a wedge issue to scare old people that Republicans are going to do away with Social Security. Republicans will probably use immigration as an issue to scare people who are opposed to the illegal immigration that we've seen. I mean, that they'll use that as a wedge issue, primarily blue-collar workers that can be effective with. But as far as like a serious discussion of that issue, I don't think it exists. I think that, and the person who really needs to be concerned about it right now is Mel Martinez, who isn't up this cycle, he's up the next cycle, but he's in a lot of trouble. I mean, he's got his approval ratings are as low as the president's, and it is primarily on that one issue. So, but Social Security, Medicare, those are key issues that need to be addressed by this country very quickly, because Scott and I fairly soon, we're going to need Social Security and Medicare soon, so I want it solved.
So you keep working.
Yeah, you keep working. You all need to get second jobs when you graduate, by the way, just to pay for my Social Security. I want to make sure you understand that. Those are issues that are going to have to be tackled in the next, certainly in the next decade, and I think they will, primarily because of the baby boom generation. It might not be pretty, and it's not going to be good for you guys, but I think Scott and I will be okay.
And that's the important thing, right? We all agree with that.
The way to look at it is, it primarily has happened since the first Bush, with a guy named Lee Atwater, who helped craft his campaign. Is politics and political campaigns, particularly the use of the media, became less about rallying people to you and more about dividing people into little subgroups, into little warring camps. And then once you get everybody divided up, then you start collecting the warring camps, and the candidate that can get the most warring camps on his or her side is the one that wins. The swift voting is what a lot of people talk about in the last campaign between Bush and Kerry. But I will tell you that the most amazing example of negative campaigning, probably the dirtiest I've ever seen in covering, was what George Bush, the current George Bush, did to John McCain in the 2000 South Carolina primary. He had John McCain pro-gay marriage, against breast cancer research, and actually questioned his patriotism. And this is a guy who spent, 7 years in a POW camp, and this is by a guy who never served a day, It's an amazing process, and when you've got somebody like a Karl Rove or Lee Atwater or James Carville, that's what happens. And the problem is these people then have to govern. So, I think the issues that are going to drive the campaign, I think, will be Iraq and the economy, and many of these other issues will just be wedge issues that they'll try to divide people.
Okay.
Well, I agree, and on the other side of John McCain is the destruction of, on the Democratic side is the destruction of Max Cleland from Georgia, who lost his limbs in the war and was considered to be not patriotic, or was labeled to be not patriotic. But I think on the issues, all these drive around the economy, we're getting right back to these economy again. And one of the bigger issues on the economy that I think is going to come up is globalization, the shift of the working force from the United States somewhere else, and it may not come up in this campaign, but it will later.
I have just a couple of more things I'd like to cover kind of briefly, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for questions from you all. Number one, can any of the Democrats catch Hillary? We're new numbers. Now, we talked about Iowa and had a little chuckle about it. But the fact is, there it was on the television screen this morning that Hillary is only a couple of points ahead of Barack Obama in Iowa. Can Obama, Edwards, can anybody catch her? And Mike, you want to start?
I tell you that the national polls are, at this point, I think, are meaningless, because it doesn't matter whether Hillary Clinton is winning by 20 points in a national poll, because she has to win these individual primaries. So it doesn't really matter how well she's doing nationally. It matters how well she's doing in Iowa. And that she has a 2-point lead over Obama in Iowa, I think is amazing, and I'll tell you why. The Clintons do not have any real organization in Iowa before this election cycle. The first time Bill Clinton ran, Iowa senator was running for president, so Clinton didn't even campaign in Iowa. He didn't have any volunteers, he didn't contest the state. The second time he ran, he was president, he didn't have any opponents, so he didn't have to campaign there either. For Clinton to be, ahead of Obama, or even in a neck-and-neck race in Iowa, I think is very significant. And I think that barring a major gaffe, which, again, God, we're dealing with the Clintons here, folks. Anything can happen. I think the guy that can beat her is Obama, and I just don't see him being able to pull that off.
Yeah. Quick answer. Can she? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not.
Okay.
I thought Thomas Mann summed it up the way I think about it. I mean, she's out there; she can't be beat. I don't think it's written yet. But it's close. It's down to 3 there.
Yeah. The Democrats must play to the left side of the party in order to get their, it's the old Richard Nixon thing. The Republicans run to the right and dash back to the middle. The Democrats run to the left and dash back to the middle. How patient will the liberals be on the Iraq issue with the candidate, with their candidate?
Depends on how much they want to win. I think that the electability issue becomes the big issue for a lot of people, and I'm reading and hearing that more people, a lot of Democrats and Republicans, either side. I mean, you can look at their support for the candidates. The big question for a lot of them is this the person that can win? It's not whether they agree with me completely or whatever. Can Rudy beat Hillary, or can Hillary beat Rudy, or whatever the question is? If that's what it is, I think they may, sit there and go, but I think they'll go for it.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I don't have an answer on that.
I think that it is fascinating to watch the Clinton campaign, because I don't think the Clinton campaign has run to the left at all in this primary, which is incredibly unusual. I know you gotta be a real junkie to care about this, but you gotta understand, Hillary Clinton's been talking about faith and family since the day she got into this race. That's not a traditional Democratic move to the left. She talked about abortion, and she questioned abortion. I think that the issue that she uses is that they should be safe and available and rare, is what her tagline is. And so I think that once the party, I think you're right. Generally, the Democrat always moves to the middle. The Republican goes from the far right to